Mr. Sergeant of Arms, invite the members into the chamber and close the doors. I hereby declare the House of Representatives of the 112th General Assembly of the State of Tennessee now in session. Will the members please stand? Will the visitors in the gallery please stand and remain standing through the Pledge of Allegiance? Representative Kumar will introduce the chaplain of the day. Representative Kumar, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to have Pastor Joe Rushing with us in the General Assembly today to be our chaplain of the day. Mr. Rushing pastors the Main Street Church of Christ in Springfield, Tennessee. He has done so for 31 years. While I've called upon him and while driving here, I thought of everybody knows Pastor Joe, everybody in our community. And I thought, what does it mean to be a pastor? Certainly, a pastor is the leader of a church. They conduct worship services and they give advice and counsel to the congregation and members. But Pastor Joe is different. He has enlarged that theme to be the person who gives advice and counsel to the community. Everybody with a moment's time with Pastor Joe gets the feeling of the openness, friendliness, and God's grace. We are proud to have him in our community. Pastor Joe grew up in Murfreesboro, Old Central High School. He was part of the state football championship team in 1971. He worked at Rushing's Supermarket, you see the family connection, and then Pop Salvage, and went on to Lipscomb University, where he graduated in biblical languages. It was busy work, but he found time to meet the wonderful Miss Gay Welch, who, after meeting Pastor Joe, or the future Pastor Joe, went on to New Zealand for a 2-year mission trip. She returned and they married, and they have 3 children and 4 grandchildren. Pastor Joe is active in Kiwanis and is the spirit of Kiwanis. He is a chaplain with the hospital and with hospice. He's also a writer. He writes regularly in the Robertson County Connection. So do I. So we are part of the Robertson County Connection Writers Caucus. Pastor Joe, it's great to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here. As I review my 68 years, I thank my parents and teachers and elected officials and taxpayers for the role that they have played in educating me and my fellow Tennesseans. Once I asked my high school Facebook friends, who were some of the most important people in your life? And one of them mentioned the Latin teacher, Miss Ethel Heron. She never married, but if you count her love affair with Julius Caesar, she made a dead language come alive for 40 years. And she taught more English and history and legal and medical vocabulary that was learned in that one class than you can ever imagine. There was a lady, Miss Oma McNabb, who's almost 100 years old now, who taught algebra. One of her students said, Miss McNabb taught us how to listen to explanation, tackle problems, and get the work done. She was more than helpful doing a rehash with corrections, extra prep for math contests, and taught us a myriad of skills for any career or day-to-day problem solving. And Debbie White Leahy, now a retired principal in Tennessee, said Bobby Modrell's civics class was my favorite class at Central, where I learned all the countries in the world because of his map drills. I also became aware of current events because every Monday morning he expected us to know one local, state, and national current event, and it could not be repeated by anyone else. Time will not permit me to speak of all those teachers worthy of our praise, but these stories can be repeated from Bristol to Memphis. Teachers of today don't need to be afraid to be tough and fair and know your stuff, because you are shaping the lives of students and schools and communities. And the governor and this body know that quality teachers and teaching are the keys to make a great future for Tennessee and its citizens. May God help us to deliver that quality education to this generation and the generations that are to come. And may the majority of those students receive with eagerness that gift that we're trying to place before them. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for those special teachers who have shaped our lives. And raise up more teachers, Father, with mastery of their subjects and passion to deliver it to our young people. Raise up caring parents who will see that their children are getting the skills they need to succeed. Grant wisdom to these elected officials to make decisions that are in the best interest of all students and teachers, so teachers can be equipped with what they need to equip students with the basics that they need for a successful life. Lord, we pray for the nations of the earth today, especially the people of Ukraine, who are fighting courageously against Vladimir Putin's deadly invasion. We confess that we are all too familiar with the weapons of war and conflict and greed. And Father, may we allow your Spirit and your word to develop in us the fruit of the Spirit, that love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, that these be the hallmarks of our life. These wonderful traits of character cannot be legislated, nor can they ever be outlawed. But the widespread practice of these virtues would improve every relationship. It would help improve all the social problems that we face. We ask your favor, Father, upon our president, our governor, our senators, our representatives, state and local. Be with our judiciary. Be with those who are in law enforcement and all our citizens to make this state and our nation everything that you want it to be. May we leave our corner of the world better than we found it. And I thank you, Father, for Jesus, the master teacher, our wonderful counselor, the Prince who brings peace. And in his name I offer this prayer. Amen.
Representative Kumar will lead us in the pledge.
Let's salute. Join me. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Roll call.
Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Mr. Speaker, 89 members present.
Let journal reflect that Representatives Jernigan, Alexander, Camper, and Griffey are excused. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Welcoming and honoring.
Welcome and honoring. We have a presentation. Representative Doggett, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request that the Sergeant of Arms escort our guests into the chamber.
Mr. Sergeant of Arms, please escort the guests to the well, please. Representative Doggett, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request that the clerk read the resolution.
Mr. Clerk, please read the resolution.
House Joint Resolution 864 by Chairman Doggett, a resolution to recognize Beth Keaton on the occasion of her retirement. Whereas it is appropriate that the members of this General Assembly should honor those citizens who have performed with uncommon devotion and enthusiasm throughout their years of public service. And whereas one such individual is Beth Keaton, who has served with distinction as Vice President of Community Development with the Lawrence County Chamber of Commerce. And whereas after 3 decades of exemplary service, Ms. Keaton recently announced that she will be taking her much-deserved retirement on February 22nd, 2022. And whereas Beth Keaton began her illustrious career in economic and community development in 1992 with Lawrence County's 21st Century Council and continued to be a driving force behind the economic and civic well-being of her community after that organization merged with the Lawrence County Chamber of Commerce in 2002. whereas Ms. Keaton's impact on her community has been far-reaching, from her contributions to career and technical education through procuring grant funding to establish instructional service centers with Tennessee College of Applied Technology, to her work in animal welfare, co-founding and serving on the board of Friends of Lawrence County Animals. And whereas Ms. Keaton's legacy of leadership includes building bridges throughout Lawrence County to foster meaningful conversations and taking action to improve literacy, beautification, substance abuse prevention, homelessness services, recidivism rates, and various other community development endeavors. And whereas throughout her estimable career, Ms. Keaton has demonstrated the utmost professionalism, ability, and integrity, winning the sincere respect and admiration of her colleagues and the citizens of Lawrence County. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the House of Representatives of the 112th General Assembly of the State of Tennessee, the Senate concurring, that we extend to Beth Keaton our heartfelt wishes for a happy and fulfilling retirement and every continued success in her future endeavors.
Representative Doggett, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Miss Beth has been a great friend of mine for several years now. She was one of the first faces that I saw when I joined the Lawrence County Chamber of Commerce a few years ago. Beth has been a great ambassador for Lawrence County as well as the state of Tennessee, because in her role at the chamber, when there were opportunities for new business to come into Lawrence County, she was one of those familiar faces and friendly faces that these people would see. And so Beth has been doing the Lawrence County Leadership Group, and they are with us today up here in the balcony since 2010. And this today is her last trip to the Capitol with the Lawrence County Leadership Group. And so I wanted to honor her for her years of service and dedication to our community and our state by bringing her here on the floor with us today. Would you hand me that plaque? So we've got her a signed and framed copy of her resolution. Would you like to say anything? Well, if you want to. Mr. Speaker, can Ms. Keaton say a few words?
Absolutely, you're recognized.
I just want to say how truly honored I am. I appreciate this so much. My career has been a passion, not a job. I've enjoyed it. We have great representation for Lawrence County with Senator Hensley and Representative Doggett and Representative Byrd. And so thank you all for everything that you've done. But thank you for this recognition. Thank you so much.
Senator Hensley, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just add to what Representative Doggett said. Even while I was over here in the House, I worked with Beth at the Chamber in Lawrence County. She's been a great asset. She will be greatly missed by Lawrence County and the Chamber. She's a great friend of mine as well. And Beth, I just wish you all the best in retirement. But thank you.
Representative Doggett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And also we have Kayla, Ms. Beth's daughter, is with us, and Ryan Egley from the chamber as well. Mr. Speaker, would you come down and have a picture with us?
We're under welcome and honoring. Representative Boyd, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, today I actually have two things under welcome and honor. Representative Susan Lynn and I would like to welcome Leadership Wilson, who's down here for the day. If you'll make him feel welcome. But members, I also have with me in the back Alex Johnson, who's a sophomore at Friendship Christian School in Lebanon that's with us today. And for those of you that have participated in the Spend a Day in My Wills Challenge, either in 2020 or this year, be sure to go back there and visit with Alex for a minute. And folks, if you'll make him feel welcome. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Sapicki.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I have some very dear friends from Murray County here today. Up here to my left, Elaine Wells, Deb Collins, and Anna Bailey. If you'll welcome them to the General Assembly, I'd really appreciate it.
Representative Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Up to my left here, I have with my intern this morning, Miss Sherry Sampson, I have my two beautiful ladies up here. They're Miss Becky Gregory's granddaughters. I have Miss Rainey Lease and Miss Sable Estelle. We'll give them a big welcome.
Representative Kiesling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll make this quick. This has been a very special week for me. I've been blessed to have my grandson with me, and Max, I'm not going to ask you to stand up and be recognized, but I want to recognize each and every one of you, my colleagues, who took time to speak to him, who took just that minute to say, "Hey, Max, how you doing?" And you know, that means a lot when we have our children, our grandchildren with us. It's just that little thing that means so much, not only to him, but to me. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. And thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Dixie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to take time to recognize one of our Sergeant at Arms, Mr. Reuben Sanders. Mr. Reuben Sanders, today is his birthday. Happy birthday, Mr. Sanders.
Representative Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to welcome the FBI and thank them for all that they do and being here at the state capitol.
Representative Whitson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'd like for you to join me in a moment of silence for a true American hero that was buried yesterday at Arlington National Cemetery. Command Sergeant Major Cliff Adams served in the 173rd Airborne in Vietnam, where he was wounded but decorated for gallantry and valor. Sergeant Major Adams put up with me as a young officer at Schofield Barracks, Hawaii, Fort McClellan, Alabama, and with U.S. 7th Corps in Stuttgart, Germany. Sergeant Major passed away last year, and his burial was yesterday. So join me in a moment of silence to honor this great American and his wife, Margaret. We're thinking about her. Thank you, members.
Thank you. Representative Gillespie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to point out that Leadership Bartlett is here today. If y'all could stand up and make them feel welcome, please.
Representative Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'm pleased to report that based on the fact that I'm holding this trophy, that the members were again successful last night in the members intern basketball game, keeping our streak alive. We won 59-45. And if I could have the members of the team stand up, Chairman Williams,
Chairman Haston dominated the game. The good news, Mr. Speaker, to report, you weren't there and we missed you. Usually you dominate in the middle, but the interns decided to get a little rough with Chairman Haston, so he turned it on a little bit, which benefited our team. And as I close, I'm reminded of the great words to paraphrase of a great Tennessean, Toby Keith. We're not as young as we once was, but we're as good once as we ever was. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Never a good idea to make a professional athlete in their sport mad while you're playing them in their sport. Maybe that's a life lesson for those interns. Representative Williams, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wanted to take an opportunity to recognize my daughter, who tomorrow will celebrate her 18th birthday and be graduating this year. Her mother and I are beside ourselves, but we love Carson and excited about what the Lord has planned for her. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Sparks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to recognize MTSU Film and Media. They're doing a screening tonight, 4:30 to 6. Folks are invited to the John Bragg School of Journalism, room 103. I want to recognize Tom Neff, the professor over there, and Zach Woodard, the producer of this short video tonight. And he's also the producer for WGNS. So just want to invite the public to come to MTSU, room 103 for the screening. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else seeking recognition or welcome and honoring? Representative Love.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to grab Representative Beck, if he will, to join me here for a minute once he gets through talking to Garrett. East High School basketball team, state 2A basketball champions. We want to congratulate them. The school is in Representative Beck's district, but we share the players in District 58 and District 51. So congratulations to the East High School boys 2A state championship. Please, members, give them a great round of applause for their championship.
Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Introduction to resolutions.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that all resolutions properly filed be introduced pursuant to Rule number 17 and placed on the consent calendar, refer to the appropriate standing committee.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Senate Joint Resolutions congratulatory and memorializing.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that all Senate joint resolutions congratulatory and memorializing lying on the desk be placed on the consent calendar pursuant to Rule number 17.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Resolutions lying over.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that all resolutions lying over be referred to the appropriate standing committee.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Introduction of bills.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that House Bill 2910 be introduced and passed on first consideration.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Senate bills on first consideration.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that Senate Bill 504, 1667, 1668, 1983, 2002, 2087, 2124, 2270, 2406, 2418, 2522, 2551, 2574, 2650, 2682, 2723, 2750, and 2790 transmitted by the Senate be held on the desk pending third consideration of their companion House bills.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Senate bills on second consideration. House bills on second consideration.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that House Bills 2909 be passed on second consideration and be held on the desk or referred to the appropriate standing committee.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Petitions and memorials, reports from standing committees, reports from select committees, calendars. Mr. Speaker, the House has a consent calendar.
Chairman Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of the consent calendar on third and final consideration in keeping with Rule 50.
Gentlemen, moves passage of the consent calendar, probably second. Mr. Clerk, any objections been filed?
Mr. Speaker, item one, House Resolution 170 has been objected to by Chairman Dixie.
All right, anyone seeking recognition on the consent calendar? Seeing none. We are voting on the consent calendar. All members favor vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 87, no nays.
Having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare consent calendar passed without objection. Motion to reconsider is tabled. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, the House has a regular calendar.
Call it first bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2667 by Speaker Sexton, Chairman Vaughn, and others relative to availability of healthcare personnel and healthcare facilities.
Chairman Vaughn, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 2667 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Vaughn moves passage, probably second. Mr. Clerk, call First Amendment.
House Health Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Terry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to adopt.
Chairman Terry moves adoption amendment number 1, probably second. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we're all ready and happy that it appears that the COVID pandemic is approaching our rear view mirror, we've still got some issues in front of us that relate to healthcare staffing crisis across the state. The healthcare workforce shortage continues to be a great challenge for providers, and what this bill will allow is the Commissioner of Health to declare a healthcare staffing emergency for short periods of time to be able to utilize some of the tactics that were employed during COVID. This has to be recognized, has to be reported to not only the governor, but also the Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor. And with that brief explanation, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairman Vaughn renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 2667 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Ogles, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 91, no nays.
House Bill 2667 received a constitutional majority. I hereby declare passed by objection. Motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2245 by Speaker Pro Tem Marsh, relative to transportation.
Speaker Pro Tem Marsh, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of HB 2245 on third and final consideration.
Speaker Pro Tem Marsh moves passage. Probably second. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House Transportation Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Howell, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw.
Without objection. All right, let's try that again. Chairman
My
Howell.
mistake. Move to adopt.
Chairman Howell moves adoption of amendment number 1. Properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Speaker Pro Tem Marsh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What this bill is concerning, when a towing company is towing a tractor or trailer, this bill requires that the towing company notify the owner of the equipment in 3 days by searching the U.S. DOT number on the side of the tractor or the registration plates on the tractor or trailer. Similar notification is currently required for rental companies in this state. With that, I'll renew my motion.
Speaker Pro Tem Marsh renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 2245 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Lamberth, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 90, no nays.
House Bill 2245 and received a constitutional majority. I hereby declare passed. I object to motion to reconsider is tabled. Call next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2139 by Chairman White, relative to use of results for TCAP test administrative 2020-2021 school year. Mr. Speaker, Senate bills on the desk.
Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2321.
Chairman White moves substitute form Senate Bill 2321, probably second without objection. So ordered. Chairman White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 2321 on third and final consideration.
Chairman White moves passage of Senate Bill 2321 on third and final consideration, probably second. Mr. Clerk, call First Amendment.
House Education Administration Committee Amendment number 1. Mr. Speaker, it's the same as Senate Amendment number 1.
Vice Chairman Hurt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, what this bill before you is doing, this morning our state superintendents are in town at a conference, and I had breakfast with them, about 100 of them. And there's this one thing they wanted on their bucket list this year was this particular bill. And what it does, it sets a new baseline to measure districts and school AMOs, the annual measurable objective goals that began with the TCAP test that students took in the 2020-2021 school year.
What this is a reset button that does not hold the districts accountable for results that were obtained prior to COVID-19 pandemic. The 2020-21 were the first post-pandemic TCAP tests administered to the students. So this is a reset that they asked for. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairman White renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker Sexton. To the sponsor, this is for only one calendar year?
Chairman White.
One school year?
Right, for the school year. Every year, the schools are graded based upon their AMO, annual measurable objective, and the TVOS scores. And so coming out of 2 years of pandemic, we know that the scores were lower on the students due to virtual and everything. So we couldn't use the 2019. It was hold them to accountability that they couldn't reach. So we're resetting the AMO at the 2020-2021 TCAP test given.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you. And on the future tests, I hope that we keep in mind that we're literally going to have a generation of students who are going to underachieve no matter what we do. And we haven't put the resources in place to bring them up, catch them up, nor keep them up on academic achievement. So I hope that this is only the beginning of us recognizing the true impact of COVID, the pandemic, upon our school children, along with our staff and our faculty. Thank you very much. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 2321, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Powell, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 88, no nays.
Senate Bill 2321, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion reconsider is tabled. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2139 by Chairman White, relative to school attendance.
Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It came to my attention this bill is not moving forward in the Senate, so I'd like to hold House Bill 2139 on the desk.
Without objection, hold on the desk. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2855 by Chairman Kumar, relative to coverage of emergency services. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman Kumar, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2386.
Chairman Kumar moves to substitute and conform Senate Bill 2386. Probably second without objection. So ordered. Chairman Kumar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 2386 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Kumar moves passage of Senate Bill 2386 on third and final consideration. Probably second. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Insurance Committee Amendment number 1, Mr. Speaker, it's the same as Senate Amendment number 1.
Vice Chair Lady Rudder, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Insurance Committee Amendment number 1 is in the Senate bill. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I move to withdraw House Insurance Committee Amendment number 1.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Kumar, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, House Bill 2855, Senate Bill 2386 apply the prudent layperson standard to a medical emergency. That is, if a prudent layperson goes to the emergency room because they think they're having a heart attack, if the final diagnosis is different, insurance coverage will not be denied, nor will it be denied based on lack of prior authorization or a contractual agreement between the payer and the healthcare provider. With that explanation, Mr. Speaker, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Chairman Kumar renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 2386, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Powell, aye. Moon, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 89, no nays.
Senate Bill 2386, having received constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed by objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1134 by Chairman Farmer, relative to motor vehicle insurance. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman Farmer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute conform to this Senate Bill 504.
Chairman Farmer moves substitute conform Senate Bill 504, probably second without objection. So ordered. Chairman Farmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 504 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Farmer moves passage of Senate Bill 504 on third and final consideration, probably second. Mr. Clerk, call the First Amendment.
House Amendment 1 by Chairman Farmer. Mr. Speaker, it was timely filed.
Chairman Farmer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt this amendment. It rewrites the bill. And
Chairman Farmer, please explain the amendment.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, what this does is this allows for, it's regards to property damage for your vehicle. So if you go and hit someone, this raises from $15,000 from minimum to $25,000. So it's property damage only, has nothing to do with personal injury, trying to keep up with inflation, the cost of parts for other vehicles, and so forth. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'll renew my motion.
Chairman Farmer moves adoption of House Amendment number 1, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Any objection to the question? We are on the board. All those in favor of adopting amendment number 1, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 85, no nays, 1 present, not voted.
Having received constitutional majority, amendment number 1 is adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Farmer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, that amendment rewrote the bill. I've explained it, and I'll be happy to answer any questions or concerns that you may have. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'll renew my motion.
Chairman Farmer renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 504 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 83, no nays, 3 present, not voted.
Senate Bill 504, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. Motion to reconsider is tabled. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2442 by Chairman Farmer, relative to employment as a law enforcement officer.
Chairman Farmer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage House Bill 2442 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Farmer moves passage. Bobby second. Mr. Clerk, any amendments been filed?
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Chairman Farmer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, what this does, back in 2016, this came from a constituent to start out with. Had a friend, lives over in North Carolina, had worked in law enforcement up in Washington, D.C., worked for the federal government, works for the state of North Carolina, wants to move to Tennessee to work here. But he's a legal permanent resident. He's not a United States citizen yet, but he's a legal permanent resident here legally, pays taxes, has all the qualifications needed for law enforcement, right? But in Tennessee, in order to work for law enforcement, if you're a legal permanent resident, we had a requirement that said you also had to be honorably discharged from the military. Not real sure why we put that in place. That was put in place back in 2016. But if we remove the language that you also have to be honorably discharged from the military, along with all the training, everything else that a law enforcement officer has to have here in Tennessee, this would allow for other people to come and work here in Tennessee as a law enforcement officer. So all this does is remove that requirement that you also have to be honorably discharged from the military before you could be a legal permanent resident to work for law enforcement here in Tennessee. And I'm putting a 6-year limit on it. If you've not obtained your citizenship within 6 years, then you can no longer work for law enforcement. We all know how important it is for us to have qualified, good law enforcement officers. And we know how hard it is to get those folks sometimes to come and work, some in our local municipalities and such. So I just see this as a way for us to get some good folks here that want to live in Tennessee and want to protect Tennesseans to come and work here in Tennessee. So that's what it does. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairman Farmer renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Doggett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the sponsor, would this have any effect on any of the current rules that would with Tennessee Consolidated Retirement if they were to try to come to work for the state in law enforcement, being that they're not a U.S. citizen?
Chairman Farmer.
And thank you for that question, Chairman Doggett. As I understand, the only thing I'm doing is removing that requirement that they be honorably discharged from the military. And it's my understanding that they would receive all the benefits and qualifications as anyone else would, as they are here legally. taking the right steps. They hadn't snuck across the border or anything else like this. They are here legally working on their citizenship at this point in time.
Representative Doggett. Very good.
Thank you.
Representative Powell.
Thank you. Just want to appreciate the sponsor. I actually was the one that carried the bill in 2016, and the honorable discharge was a concession we made. But clearly, we need more people, good people in law enforcement, and these people are working towards their citizenship. And I think this is a good piece of legislation that's justified and will certainly help a lot of people in law enforcement, especially in communities like mine, where you might have people who've come from other countries and are here, trying to work on their citizenship, and having them have the knowledge of those communities and being able to sometimes even speak those languages helps with law enforcement, because you want to have people in your communities that look like the communities that you are there sworn to protect. So thanks for this piece of legislation. It's a good bill.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Any objection? Oh, Representative Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Farmer, for bringing it. I have a question, though. Coming from a family that came here from another country, in the original legislation of refugees or immigrants, you had to become a citizen within 5 years. Does this bill have a barrier or a limit how long you get to be able to show your citizenship?
Chairman Farmer.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. It does 6 years.
Representative Weaver.
6 years, and then they have to show proof of citizenship.
Chairman Farmer.
That is correct.
Representative Weaver.
Thank you.
All right. Any further discussion? Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker Sexton, and thank you for the bill, Chairman. Just a little observation. When we talk about residency and we talk about the requirements of such that local folks want to make for themselves, I think your bill makes a lot of sense. And I would think that if folks, and we've passed a bill allowing or mandating that the local folks have to hire if someone wants to apply and is qualified from outside of their boundaries, I would think that that residency requirement within a certain number of years should be a requirement for that bill that we passed. So I'm going to bring that bill next year. I'm supporting your bill this year. Thank you.
Chairman Farmer.
And I just want to say one thing. This bill doesn't require any municipality or locale or any department of state to hire anybody. It just gives them the option to hire folks that they deem qualified for this position. So that's all I had. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker. And I know the chairman to be an honorable man. I was not insinuating such, but thank you for the clarification.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question on the bill.
Oh, previous question's been called. Very good. Representative Parkinson seconds that. Very good. I see no objection. All those in favor of House Bill 2442 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member votes, every member must change their vote. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 87, no nays, 3 present, on voting.
House Bill 2442 has received a constitutional majority. I hereby declare it passed without objection. The motion reconsider is tabled. Call next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2728 by Leader Lamberth, relative to the judicial system.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move passage of House Bill 2728 on third and final consideration.
Leader Lamberth moves passage. Bobby second. Mr. Clerk, call it first amendment.
House State Government Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Keesling, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment does rewrite the bill, so we're going to defer to the sponsor for further explanations. We move to adopt.
Chairman Keesling moves adoption amendment number 1. Probably second. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye, aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
Leader Lamberth renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 2728 as amended vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change your vote? Hawkeye. It was a good TV show. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 89, no nays.
House Bill 2728 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection to the motion. Reconsider table. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2145 by Chair Lady Littleton and others relative to foster care. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chair Lady Littleton, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2398.
Chair Lady Littleton moves to substitute and form Senate Bill 2398 without objection. So ordered. Chair Lady Littleton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 2398 on third and final consideration.
Chair Lady Littleton moves passage of Senate Bill 2398 on third and final consideration. Block seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Chair Lady Littleton, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're calling this the Tennessee Foster's Hope, and there's two parts to it. The first part of the bill will expand eligibility for extension of foster care services, a wraparound service program for young adults still in DCS custody when they turn 18. Eligibility will be expanded to include full-time employment and non-credit bearing vocational training programs. Part 2 of this bill will allow DCS to pay a per diem to relative caregivers instead of placing a child into full custody. DCS does not currently reimburse caregivers who assume custody of a child they are related to. This prevents many relative caregivers from accepting their responsibility, resulting in the child going into full state custody at the full daily foster care rate. Under the proposal, DCS would reimburse relative caregivers at 50% of the daily foster care board rate for the level of care assigned to the child. Be eligible, relative caregivers must have to satisfy screening and training requirements set out by DCS to ensure the child's safety. With that, I renew my motion.
Chair Lady Littleton renews her motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you, Chair Lady. You do a wonderful job chairing your committee, and your passion for our children is exceptional. I just have a question. I don't think it's a stupid question, but I would like to know, it's got a $35 million fiscal note. How does that not go please explain the trajectory of this bill to me, because I'm not quite understanding. Usually bills go behind the budget on that.
Chair Lady Littleton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is one of the governor's bills, an administrative bill, but all of these caregivers will have wraparound services just like each foster child that's in the system.
Representative Weaver.
Thank you.
Representative Weaver, it's in the budget. It's funded in the budget. All right. Any further discussion? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 2398 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has everyone cast a vote? Does anyone wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 89, no nays, one present, not voting.
Senate Bill 2398 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1722 by Chairman Russell relative to change of beneficiary after retirement.
Chairman Russell, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1722 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Russell moves passage. Public second. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House State Government Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Keesling, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment does rewrite the bill. We're going to defer to Chairman Russell for further explanation. We move to adopt.
Chairman Keesling moves adoption amendment number 1. Public second. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye, aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopt it. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Russell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 1722 allows a retired member of the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System to cancel their selected designation of beneficiary upon written request of the member and designate another beneficiary. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairman Russell renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 1722 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 89, no nays.
House Bill 1722, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion reconsiders table. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2613 by Chairman Faison relative to investigation reports.
Chairman Faison, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 2613, third and final consideration.
Chairman Faison moves passage. 5 Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House State Government Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Keesling, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We move to adopt and defer to our chairman for further explanation.
Chairman Keesling moves adoption amendment number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopt the next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Faison, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
Chairman Faison renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Was that a hand, Representative Shaw?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like for the sponsor to explain what his legislation does.
All right, Chairman Faison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, this bill was brought by the Tennessee Coalition for Open Government. It simply clarifies certain information regarding deaths of inmates is subject to the public records request. This includes the person's age, name, time of death, date of death, and cause of death.
All right. Any further discussion? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 2613 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Eldridge, aye. Zachary, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 82, 7 nays.
House Bill 2613 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion reconsiders table. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2706 by Chairman Howell and others relative to claims administration.
Chairman Howell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 2706 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Howell moves passage, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Finance Ways and Means Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairlady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for adoption and I defer to the sponsor for an explanation.
Chairlady Hazelwood moves adoption amendment number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Howell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, the Tennessee Treasurer's Office, David Lillard's office, is responsible for settling all claims brought by drivers on Tennessee's state and federal highways when their vehicles may be damaged by various road hazards, which of course would include potholes. This bill will allow TDOT and the treasurer to cooperate in creating an updated, streamlined, centralized reporting system so that these claims can be better taken care of. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairman Howell renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 2706 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 89, no nays.
House Bill 2706 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion reconsiders table. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2561 by Chairman Terry relative to compacts.
Chairman Terry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 2561 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Terry moves passage, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment, please.
House Health Committee Amendment number 1.
Vice Chairman Leatherwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt the amendment and defer to the sponsor for explanation.
Vice Chairman Leatherwood moves adoption amendment number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopt the next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Government Operations Committee Amendment number 1, Mr. Speaker, filed as House Amendment 2.
Chairman Reagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment puts both of the compacts in the bill into the sunset cycle for 2024. Move to adopt.
Chairman Reagan moves adoption of amendment number 2, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of amendment number 2 say aye, aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopt it. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Terry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 2561 contains 2 interstate compacts for healthcare professionals. One is for occupational therapists, the other one is for audiologists and speech language pathologists. This bill facilitates a process for licensure reciprocity for these health professions, much like other reciprocity compacts that we have in place for other healthcare professionals. I renew my motion.
Chairman Terry renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 2561 as amended vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, the amendment was change of vote. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 88, no nays.
House Bill 2561 has received a constitutional majority. I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1748 by Chairman Reagan relative to emergency rules.
Chairman Reagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Due to Senate actions, I move to hold this bill on the desk.
Without objection, hold on desk. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1749 by Chairman Reagan and others relative to state agencies.
Chairman Reagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1749 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Reagan moves passage, followed by second. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House State Government Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Keesling, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment does rewrite the bill. We'll defer to Chairman Reagan for further explanation. We move to adopt.
Chairman Keesling moves adoption amendment number 1, probably second. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye, aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopt it. Next amendment, Ms. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Reagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Simply stated, this bill limits administrative agency and power and maximizes individual liberty. In essence, it levels the playing field for private entities. That is to say, it scraps the notion that agencies get to interpret the rules of their own creation to their own benefit. Essentially, it disallows a court to defer to the agency's interpretation of their own rule when that contest reaches a court level. It must go through several levels under the UAPA before it gets to a court. But when it gets to a court, the court may not defer to the agency's interpretation. With that explanation, I stand ready to answer questions, and I'm renew my motion.
Chairman Reagan renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chairman Reagan. I'm just trying to understand. Can you just give me an example of how your bill will work?
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you. Under the UAPA, if there is a contest within a company that has administrative law judges, the first step is the individual who is offended by the particular rule within the agency tries to resolve the issue at the lowest level, supervisors or whatever. The next step is in front of an administrative law judge. This bill touches neither one of those steps. However, either entity may appeal to a court after the administrative law judge renders a ruling. When it gets to the court level, in the past, due to something called the Chevron doctrine, courts have ruled in favor of the agency's interpretations of their own rules. This bill says judges must be judges. They make the decision, not the agency.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Chairman Reagan. Is this for, and I apologize, it's my first time hearing the bill, so is this for certain groups or is it for anybody in any occupation? Am I even in the right ball field speaking in regards to occupation?
Chairman Reagan.
Occupations are not the focus of this. This is any agency that's under the Uniform Administrative Procedures Act and promulgates rules accordingly.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And give me an example of someone that will fall under that.
Chairman Reagan.
State School Board is one, for example. There are 264 state agencies, many of whom have rulemaking authority. So all of those would be considered here.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Sponsor. I appreciate that. I have a lot more clarity on what you're doing now. Appreciate the explanation.
Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sponsor, what's your actual intent of this legislation? The Chevron doctrine was established by the U.S. Supreme Court, but you want the state of Tennessee to ignore that and allow a rule to be interpreted outside the actual intent of the rulemaking body? Why would you want to do that?
Chairman Reagan.
In the first place, Tennessee is joining several other states, Georgia, Florida, Arkansas, Wisconsin, Arizona, in passing similar legislation. Why I want to do that is to restore balance of powers. That is to say, an administrative agency, which is part of the executive branch, gets delegated the authority by this body to create rules. However, when the rules are contested through that process I just described earlier, and it finally gets to a court to appeal, this bill is intended to make the courts function as courts. In other words, not defer to the agencies that created the rules.
Representative Clemens.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I understand how the administrative procedure process works, but when we delegate that authority to that administrative body, they have the authority to come up with that rule, enact that rule. So why wouldn't their intent in making that rule be a good source of reference for the court deciding a case challenging the intent of that rule?
Chairman Reagan.
Directly to the point, the agency is certainly allowed to present its rationale in front of the court, but the court is not allowed to give deference to it. Any more than when you have an ordinary court proceeding with a plaintiff and a defendant, the court can't give deference to either one of those parties in interpreting the rules.
Representative Clemens.
But this seems to be defeating, thank you, Mr. Speaker. This seems to be defeating the very purpose of that. You know, when the Supreme Court decided this, they had a good rationale for establishing the Chevron doctrine, because that is the most knowledge. Once the legislature hands that off and they have the power and legal authority to enact that rule, and they have a stated intent for that rule, why wouldn't that be the best source of reference for someone deciding a case based on that rule? I don't understand why we would just want to usurp the intelligence and the established doctrine of the U.S. Supreme Court just because we might have an issue with one or two rules when we've already delegated them the authority to make that rule, and they know why they did it. They have the information establishing why they did it and their purpose for doing it. So why would the trier of fact not want to rely and defer on their stated intent?
Chairman Reagan.
With all due respect, sir, this bill is about making judges perform as judges. The balance of power is in the agency's favor by the fact that they have created the rule. Their interpretation of the rule should not be the deciding factor. The judge should balance all of the facts in the case to include an agency's interpretation, but also to include all of the relevant facts brought by those contesting the rule.
Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with all due respect, the judges do their job and have done their job under this precedent for some amount of time, but they also require guidance and follow doctrines within the judicial system on how to decide certain cases. And I would think that we would want judges enforcing a challenged rule to defer to the actual body who made the rule's intent in making and enacting that rule. This seems to defeat the entire purpose for your argument. So thank you for answering my questions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Chairman Reagan. Anything?
Let me summarize very briefly. In our system, we have a legislative, an executive, and a judicial branch. Our Constitution specifies that in the very first sentence of Article 2. In the second sentence of Article 2, it says that no branch may exercise the powers of any other branch. An agency that makes rules is part of the executive branch. We delegate that authority to them. However, the judicial branch exists to resolve disputes. It is, in my opinion, an infringement on the balance of powers to give that same executive branch that made the rules deference in interpreting the rules. Please notice I'm not saying you don't consider the arguments put forward by that executive agency, but you don't give them deference. With that explanation, sir, I renew my motion.
Representative Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Representative Reagan, I want to try to understand something here. I support your bill, obviously. I think it's time that the separate branches of government step up to the plate and walk in and define their lanes. And I believe that's the intention of this bill, as I'm understanding it. Would it be also correct to say, we as a legislative body here, it is our job to hear both sides of the story, to hear from the resources. We have lobbyists coming to our office all the time with the no or the yes, why they want the bill or why we shouldn't vote for it. And we, as good legislators with 2 ears, by the way, it is our job to get and listen to both sides of the story. But it is not the lobbyist's job to run the law down here. It is our job as legislators to take in all of the information. Am I on the same hunt here? Is this dog on the same hunt here? In other words, is that principle that I'm sharing in my world similar to what you're saying about the judges? They take in the resources and the information that has been given to them, and then they are supposed to make the ruling, and they are to judge. Is that basically what this bill is seeking to do?
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your parallel is fairly accurate, ma'am. The idea behind this is, again, to restore a balance of power so that the judicial branch is in fact functioning as the judicial branch in its entirety. While they may consider what is put forward by the executive agency that created the rules, they do not give deference to it by virtue of this bill. And again, let me emphasize that Tennessee is one of a number of states that is taking this action.
Representative Weaver.
Thank you for that, and I do support the bill. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chairman Reagan, I read over the language of the legislation, and I have a couple of concerns. I practice, as many of you know, I practice law and litigation, and it's important as a lawyer that's going to appear in court that we make sure we not only be able to argue what our client's intent is from our perspective, it's also important that the other side gets the opportunity to also argue their side. We have one of the best justice systems, in my opinion, in the world. And when I read this language, is it your intent that the lawyers that's representing the agency cannot argue whatsoever to the judge about why they made the very rule that we gave them the power to do? So therefore, the court, the administrative judge, the hearing officer, whoever is presiding over this administrative appeal, what I'm afraid of, they only get one story. They only get one side, because you're prohibiting at all for a lawyer to argue the other side's intent of why they made the rule in the first place. So there is going to be a one-sided argument in a hearing that says no judge or hearing officer presiding over a contested case can even hear what the intent of that agency's rule was. Therefore, that's going to apply to their lawyers arguing on their behalf on why they made the rule. They're only going to hear one side. Is that your intent of this legislation?
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, sir. And I appreciate your comments. However, again, with due respect, you have misinterpreted very straightforwardly. The bill is only 4 lines. It says, as in interpreting a state statute or rule, the court presiding over the appeal of judgment, please notice that does not include administrative law judges. The court presiding over the case shall not defer to the state agency's interpretation of the statute or rule and shall interpret the statute or rule de novo. After applying all the customary tools of interpretation, the court shall resolve any remaining ambiguity against the state agency. It does not present the state agency from presenting their arguments, their interpretations. It merely says the judge in a court, not the hearing officer, not the administrative law judge, in a court. The court judge is not to defer to the state agency's interpretation of their own rule.
Representative Garrett.
Then that worries me further, because then we now have a sitting judge that this has been appealed from the administrative law judge. And in our justice system, this law, as you just described, is preventing an argument to be made from one side of the dispute, because they can't hear the interpretation from the state agency. So I've just got some real concerns that we're going to be opening up a slippery slope for our justice system to hear one side of the story. So I've got some real concerns about that.
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, sir. You are incorrect. I can't say that any more tactfully. The judge can hear both sides, and it is de novo. That means they hear both sides presented without deference or reference to previous decisions. So they are not excluding any interpretation that the agency wishes to put forward. The agencies are certainly encouraged to do that. They just may not get deference from the judge for it.
Representative Garrett.
Thank you, and I do appreciate it, and I highly respect you, Mr. Chairman, but the way this is worded, the word de novo does mean that the action completely starts over, regardless of what happens in another court. De novo means they can bring new witnesses, completely starts over, and I get that. But there is wording in here that I'm afraid can be interpreted that then they can't hear from the state agency's intent of why they created the particular rule in the first place. So that's the only reason why I have concerns about the legislation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I read you the bill in its entirety in 4 lines. There's nothing in there that prevents a judge from hearing both sides. Again, de novo, as you're correct, is hearing all the evidence completely newly, but it is not allowing the judge to take deference for the agency's interpretation. The agency can certainly present its interpretation, and the judge can take that into consideration. They just can't give deference to it.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker. To the sponsor on the rules that you're citing, are we talking about emergency rules, or are we talking about rules that have come before the Government Operations Committee?
Chairman Reagan.
Technically, this applies to any rule that has been promulgated by an agency. However, I would point out that an emergency rule is no longer in effect after 180 days. Therefore, getting something in front of a court on an appeal in 180 days is probably not going to happen in our current legal system. It would take longer than that to go through the steps to get there. So basically, it's going to apply to the rules that are promulgated through ordinary means.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, and I agree the time frame makes it improbable or unlikely, but still possible, which is why I asked. And the other half of that is, once we have approved the rules that were promulgated, does that in some way allow us to express our legislative intent?
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you for the question, and I will point out that legislative intent is something the courts are certainly free to consider. What this bill does is says the executive agency's interpretation of their own rules. is not to be considered as deference. The judge can certainly hear what their interpretation is and take that into consideration. They just may not defer to it. In essence, they've got to hear it in a balance with the others.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker. And, you know, I've served on GovOps 99% of the time that I've been in the legislature. And I'm having a hard time getting past how legislative intent expressed through GovOps approval of the rules that are promulgated by the agency, how we all of a sudden decide that that does not need to be what the court defers to, especially if we're concerned about separation of powers.
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll emphasize once more, it's not the legislative intent here that's in question. It's the agency's interpretation of their rules. Agencies interpret rules in very specific circumstances. Those circumstances may not have come before GovOps, to use your illustration there. So those interpretations may or may not have been heard by any legislative body or committee connected to us until it gets to the courts. So it's not a question of deferring to legislative intent. The courts are certainly encouraged to look at legislative intent. However, this bill is not about legislative intent. It's about executive agencies' interpretation of the rules that they promulgated, pure and simple. And it basically says a judge is going to be a judge in resolving disputes and not allow the agency that created the rules to say, this is what they mean. The judge must determine what they mean.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you. And I would respectfully disagree on how legislative intent is expressed through the department or agency, because that's what we do. When I say we, I'm talking about GovOps. That's what GovOps does, is make sure that legislative intent from the original debate and passage of the statute is expressed through the rules that are promulgated. So I don't know how we separate the two because they are one. If we don't agree that the rules that are promulgated are representative of the original legislative intent of the statute, then we don't approve them. So I'm having a difficult time, and I can't vote for a bill that, in essence, promotes activism among judges and having that unfettered ability for judges to be able to ignore legislative intent is, in fact, the creation of an environment that will just grow and develop activist judges. So I thank you for the discussion, but I'm going to have to vote against your bill. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Speaker.
Chairman Reagan, anything? No. Representative Mitchell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. All I've got to say is exactly what Representative Garrett and learned attorney, practicing attorney Garrett said.
Representative Garrett, your name was called.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I highly respect the chairman on this legislation, but my worry is, and I'm going to read the amendment, in interpreting a state statute or rule, a court presiding over the appeal of a judgment in a contested case shall not defer to a state agency's interpretation of the statute or rule. That sentence makes it where it's not de novo. Then it says, and shall interpret the statute or rule de novo. If it just said or rule de novo, with all due respect, Mr. Chairman, I would agree that this would go to a judge and start over. That sentence, in my humble opinion, makes it where the judge, or it could be interpreted where the judge could not consider the intent of the rule that the state agency made. And so that just what causes me pause to say that this is truly de novo. De novo absolutely 100% starts the proceeding over like it did not happen in a previous court, similar to small claims court when you appeal it to circuit. The sentence before the or rule de novo is what's given me pause. That this is a truly de novo standard from the administrative judge procedure if it's appealed to the Chancery Court. I think we're limiting the judge of what he can hear. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'll be glad to
Chairman Reagan.
go any further.
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In lieu of the discussion, I move to roll this to Monday's calendar and resolve discussions there. We've probably taken enough time today.
Hey, Chairman Reagan, I think Monday's full. How about Thursday?
Thursday's calendar would be great. Thank you.
Without objection, roll the Thursday's calendar. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2041 by Chairman Reagan, relative to operation of off-highway vehicles on certain highways. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman Reagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2083.
Chairman Reagan moves to substitute and conform Senate Bill 2083, probably second without objection. So ordered. Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 2083 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Reagan moves passage of Senate Bill 2083 on third and final consideration, probably second. Mr. Clerk, call First Amendment.
House Transportation Committee Amendment number 1. Mr. Speaker, same as Senate Amendment number 1.
Chairman Howell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Same as Senate amendment. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Reagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very briefly, what this bill does is a continuation of several bills that I have brought to this chamber trying to restore economic prosperity to a portion of my district and those around it that has suffered from the war on coal. And this amendment has allowed them to rebound with adventure tourism. Essentially what it does is allow small segments of state roads to connect these trails that ATVs and bikes and hikers go on so that they can get from the end of one trail to the beginning of the next. The bill was reviewed by TDOT and it reflects their inputs. I renew my motion.
Chairman Reagan renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 2083 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, as any member wish to change your vote, Faison aye. Hardaway aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 88, no nays.
Senate Bill 2083 having received a constitutional majority, everybody declare passed without objection. The motion for reconsider is tabled. Let the journal reflect Representatives Vaughn and Hazelwood are excused. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1402 by Chairman Curcio, relative to public records.
Chairman Curcio, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1402 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Curcio moves passage, probably second. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House State Government Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Kiesling, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment does rewrite the bill. We'll defer to Chairman Curcio for a further explanation. We move to adopt.
Chairman Kiesling moves adoption amendment number 1, probably second. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Curcio, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
Chairman Curcio renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 1402 as amended vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Reagan, aye. Garrett, aye. Weaver, aye. Weaver, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 82, 3 nays.
House Bill 1402, I received a constitutional majority. Everybody declare passed without objection. Motion for reconsider is tabled. Call next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1760 by Chairman Curcio, relative to employment records.
Chairman Curcio, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1760 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Kershaw moves passage, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call first amendment.
House State Government Committee Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Keesling, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment rewrites the bill. Again, we will defer to Chairman Curcio for further explanation. We move to adopt.
Chairman Keesling moves adoption amendment number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Kershaw, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
Chairman Kershaw renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Freeman.
Thank you, sir. So would this include our body?
Chairman Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To back up, so this bill was brought to me by my county attorney. What they're seeking to clarify here, not changing law, but to clarify that subsection F in this section of code applies to the governmental body that employed their own employees. So what's happened is we have folks that have moved into our county, just like every county in Tennessee from other places, and former law enforcement from other jurisdictions are calling into the county and demanding that they keep private certain records about them. And we may want to pass a law that would allow that, but what all this does is clarifies that subsection F, which is what they're kind of hanging their hat on, only applies to folks that were employed by that governmental entity.
Representative Freeman. All right, very good. Any further discussion? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 1760 as amended vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change a vote? Garrett, Weaver, Reagan, aye. Howell, aye. Cochran, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 88, no nays.
House Bill 1760, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare it passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2632 by Representative Cochran relative to public utilities. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill's on the desk.
Representative Cochran, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2443.
Representative Cochran moves substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2443. Probably second without objection. So ordered. Representative Cochran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 2443 on third and final consideration.
Representative Cochran moves passage of Senate Bill 2443 on third and final consideration. Probably second. Mr. Clerk, call First Amendment.
House Commerce Committee Amendment Number 1. Mr. Speaker,
Chairman-
same as Senate Amendment Number 1.
Vice Chairman Bricken, you're recognized.
Speaker, Commerce Committee Amendment Number 1 is the same as Senate Amendment Number 1. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Cochran, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 2632, Senate Bill 2443. It takes back authority to regulate some small wireless providers that operate in what's called the Lifeline program. Currently, 41 states regulate their own programs. The FCC regulates the others. By taking control back to Tennessee, it just makes the process more efficient. I'll renew my motion.
Representative Cochran renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 2443 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 88, no nays.
Senate Bill 2443, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2756 by Representative Powell relative to proceedings in juvenile court.
Representative Powell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 2756 on third and final consideration.
Representative Powell moves passage, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Civil Justice Committee Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Farmer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to adopt.
Chairman Farmer moves adoption amendment number 1, probably second. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Powell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill supports the original intent of the formation of the juvenile courts by the General Assembly and further streamlines the process. As amended, require the juvenile courts in delinquency cases to set a scheduling order and hearing in the initial appearance. The purpose of legislation is to make the court moving these cases through the court system more promptly, and providing a scheduling order which will make sure the parties are able to get whatever they need for a fair trial. Added language will require a dependency case brought to be set within 6 months. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Representative Powell renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 2756 as amended vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Rudd, aye. Hodges, aye. Calfee, aye. Gant, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 88, no nays.
House Bill 2756 having received constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2768 by Representative Sherrill relative to wildlife resources. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Representative Sherrill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2859.
Representative Sherrill moves to substitute and form Senate Bill 2859, probably second without objection. So ordered. Representative Sherrill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to passage of Senate Bill 2859 on third and final consideration.
Representative Sherrill moves passage of Senate Bill 2859 on third and final consideration, probably second. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House Agricultural and Natural Resources Committee Amendment number 1. Mr. Speaker, it's the same as Senate Amendment number 1.
Chairman Hallford, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Sherrill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this bill here, 2869, with the amendment requires Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency to comply with all proceeds of the Department of Agriculture, which is a division of the forestry, when conducting sales of timber harvested from TWRA property that they manage for the state of Tennessee. There has been an issue in Tennessee in my district regarding the cutting of hardwoods, and found out that TWRA is currently not under the same guidelines as our Department of Forestry and the Department of Agriculture. So we are wanting to place them with the same requirements as the Department of Forestry. And I renew my motion.
Representative Sherrill renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, would you explain the genesis from this, why this bill is before the body today?
Representative Sherrill.
Yes. Under the current way that TWRA does the cutting of timber, they are not following the guidelines of our forestry in the state of Tennessee. So we're placing them under the same guidelines.
Representative Weaver.
So we are, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we are actually then putting accountability and more eyeballs on TWRA by the passage of this bill?
Representative Sherrill.
Yes, thank you.
Representative Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the bill.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 2859 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 69, non nays 7, present not voting.
Senate Bill 2859 having received constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2662 by Speaker Sexton and Representative Hall relative to governmental entities.
Representative Hall, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the passage of House Bill 2662 on its third and final consideration.
Representative Hall moves passage. Properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House Health Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Terry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to adopt.
Chairman Terry moves adoption of amendment number 1. Probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopt the next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Hall, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Currently, the Department of Health hires the executive director of the Board of Pharmacy. House Bill 2662 changes that. It gives the Board of Pharmacy the authority to hire and fire the executive director. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Representative Hall renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 2662 as amended vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 88, no nays.
House Bill 2662 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2156 by Chairman Zachary, relative to local health departments. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2409.
Chairman Zachary moves substitute and conform Senate Bill 2409, probably second without objection. So ordered. Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We pass Senate Bill 2409 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Zachary moves passage of Senate Bill 2409 on third and final consideration, probably second. Mr. Clerk, call it first amendment.
House Health Committee Amendment Number 1, Mr. Speaker, same as Senate Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Terry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendment.
Chairman Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is a cleanup bill from the Department of Health. It does three things. It clarifies the Department of Health retains all authority to carry its mission in routine public health activities. Number 2, it prevents any confusion and disagreements between mayors. The bill clarifies the commissioner appoints county health officer. And then finally, it also clarifies that the governor does have the authority to issue executive orders in all 95 counties during a state of emergency. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairman Zachary renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none. Oh, back in the back, Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker Sexton. To the sponsor, would you give a fuller explanation of what the bill does relative to the powers that the governor has now in issuing an executive order versus what the powers would be for the governor in issuing an executive order as pertains to those counties such as Shelby who have their own governance?
Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative, for the question. This just simply clarifies the governor has the authority, but they would just want to make it clear in statute because there was some question during the state of emergency related to the 6 counties that have their own health department. He does have that authority. We're just simply clarifying that because it did create confusion. It does nothing more than that.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you. And I want to be clear. I'd like to vote for the bill if it's a good bill, but I want to know that it would not take or diminish the powers of those 6 counties in the next pandemic in looking after the best interests of those who reside in those counties.
Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, that the first point that I referenced, we actually do just that. It clarifies that the county health departments maintain their role and mission related to public health in those counties. So we actually do that within this bill on the first point that I referenced.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker. So what we're dealing with then are questions that may have arisen from the other 93 counties, 89 counties.
Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, this bill is from the Department of Health, and it's based on a piece of legislation that we passed during the special session, and we just felt it was important to provide clarity. And again, that's all this does. It's a very simple bill. There's nothing more other than the 3 points I mentioned. It's just providing clarity to things that are being done. But just coming out of the pandemic, based on the bill that we passed, we just want to be really clear in code what we're doing, what we have the authority to do, and what the intent of the legislation that we already passed is. And so that's what we do with this piece of legislation.
Representative Hardaway.
All right, thank you. I was not clear until you referenced the special sessions bill, which I did not agree with. So I'm going to have to vote against your bill. Thank you for the explanation.
Representative Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Chairman Zachary.
No, I'm just kidding. Yes, sir.
Section 1, the commissioner may appoint a county health officer responsible for providing medical direction, including medical enforcement actions. So is that saying that the commissioner of health can appoint an officer that will overrule the local county health departments?
Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This simply clarifies the commissioner has always had that authority, but because of the pandemic, there became confusion related to if the mayor had to seek the approval of the commissioner. They just created confusion, specifically in Knox County, where we had our health director step down. This simply provides clarity that it is the commissioner's role. It always has been. We're just simply clarifying it here.
Representative Beck.
So are we preempting the local ability to govern themselves under a pandemic by doing this?
Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, no, truly, Representative Beck. This is just clarifying that the commissioner has the role of appointment, because the confusion was created during the pandemic, and then the legislation we passed didn't clarify that. We should have done that here. This is just clarifying the commissioner has the authority for the appointment.
Representative Beck.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 2409 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, as any member wish to change their vote? Kershaw, aye. Lamberth, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 67, 21 nays.
Senate Bill 2409 have received constitutional majority. Everybody declare passed. Objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 702 by Chairman Todd and others relative to health care. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bills on the desk.
Chairman Todd, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bills 2787.
Chairman Todd moves to substitute and form Senate. Okay, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that's House Bill 702 by Leader Lamberth. I apologize. House Bill 702 by Leader Lamberth relative to health care. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bills on the desk.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 568.
Leader Lamberth moves to substitute and form Senate Bill 568. Probably second without objection. So ordered. Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move passage of Senate Bill 568 and third and final consideration.
Leader Lamberth moves passage of Senate Bill 568 on third and final consideration. Probably second. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House Health Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Terry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very straightforward bill. It just says that to get an organ transplant, there cannot be one factor alone that kicks you out, and that is whether or not you have had a COVID-19 vaccination. The doctor can take that into account, and it can be one of the factors that is considered, but it cannot be the sole factor. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Leader Lamberth renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Kumar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Leader, I greatly respect your constitutional concern that there should be no discrimination in medical care based on a patient's personal decision to be vaccinated or not vaccinated. I want to express my professional concern that a transplanted patient receives immunosuppression therapy, so their immunity is low and they're more vulnerable to infections. And I'm sure the transplant surgeons will take that into consideration. With that, I appreciate your concern. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Leader Lamberth. No. Any further discussion? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 568 as All those in favor of Senate Bill 568 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change your vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 68, 19 nays.
Senate Bill 568, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare it passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2771 by Chairman Todd, relative to operation of law enforcement vehicles.
Chairman Todd, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 2771 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Todd moves passage. Properly second. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House Transportation Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Howell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to adopt and defer to the sponsor for explanation.
Chairman Howell moves adoption amendment number 1. Properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye, aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopt it. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendment.
Chairman Todd, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What the amendment does, it makes the bill, first of all, and it changes it in a manner where it only requires the Department of Safety to produce informational material on how the public should interact with law enforcement when a person is being pulled over in a traffic stop. That's all it does. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairman Todd renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Miller.
Yeah, just a question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sponsor yield.
Chairman Todd.
Yes,
Representative Miller.
Thank you for the legislation. A couple of years ago, I introduced a bill for those individuals that were, let's say, for the first time getting driver's licenses, and pretty much with the same concept of, as you're getting your driver's licenses, if you're looking at a video or something, it shows you the same thing, how we should react, for especially those that are getting the new driver's licenses. I know this is not going to do that, but hopefully at some point we can get together and work on something like that as well. You know.
Chairman Todd.
Certainly, sir.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, any objections to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 2771 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hardaway, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 86, no nays, 2 present, not voted.
House Bill 2771, I received a constitutional majority. I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. All right. Let Journal reflect Representative Cassidy is excused. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2171 by Chairman Terry and others, relative to prescription safety.
Chairman Terry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 2171 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Terry moves passage. Probably second. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House Health Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Leatherwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt.
Vice Chairman Leatherwood moves adoption amendment number 1. Probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye, aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Terry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Federal law was updated in 2020 to allow opioid treatment programs to report to state prescription drug monitoring programs such as our CSMD. This bill updates state law to reflect those changes in federal law. I renew my motion.
Chairman Terry renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 2171 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 88, no nays.
House Bill 2171, having received constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1842 by Chairman Terry and others, relative to environmental protection. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman Terry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2121.
Chairman Terry moves substitute and conform Senate Bill 2121, probably seconded. Without objection, so ordered. Chairman Terry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 2121 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Terry moves passage of Senate Bill 2121 on third and final consideration, probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Agricultural and Natural Resources Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Halford, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment rewrites the bill. I move for adoption and defer to the sponsor for explanation.
Chairman Halford moves adoption House Amendment number 1, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of adopting House Amendment number 1 say aye, aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Terry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill makes clarification to the intent and practice of TDEC as it relates to the process for expansion of a landfill. With that explanation, I renew my motion.
Chairman Terry renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And sponsor, and I thank you for this legislation. I know you've been battling this issue for a while, Rutherford County. The way I'm reading this is that it removes local control, and I'm afraid I'm misunderstanding that in some way. So can you please clarify that this does not remove local control and decision about what's going on in their county?
Chairman Terry.
Thank you. No, the process of doing a landfill expansion, they put in an application, and then there is a time frame in which the local board, the regional board, would make a decision. And then after that, there is whatever decision they have, there's a potential for an appeal, and then that would go to court. And then after that, the commissioner could make the decision. It's always been the intent of the commissioner to wait to the very end. However, the way the current statute is written, the commissioner could inadvertently interject when there is local input in that first process or even in the appeals process. And so it's never been his intent or the commissioner's intent to do that. And this is just to clarify that process goes through, so there is local input there.
President Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you for clarifying that. That's important. I appreciate the legislation. Thanks.
Thank you. Representative Sparks.
With sponsor yield.
Yes.
Dr. Terry, just want to thank you for this legislation. As you and many know, our locals are very frustrated with our landfill, and they feel like their hands are tied. And it just seems to keep expanding. And just want to thank you for this and what you do for our community. Thank you, sir.
Representative Dixie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, Representative Terry, I want to thank you again for this bill, because we have that problem in my district as well. It impacts lives, and it's a health issue. And it also is an economic issue because it depresses our land values of our homes, which is most people's biggest and largest single expense in their life and investment. So thank you again, because this is a much needed piece of legislation, and I think it will cut down on legal recourse for citizens in those districts, and it'll streamline the process. So thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 2121 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 89, no nays.
Senate Bill 2121 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Bob, next bill, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that completes the regular calendar.
Next calendar, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, the House has a message calendar.
Call it first message, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1838 by Chairman Zapicki relative to the State Board of Education. Mr. Speaker, on March 17, 2022, the Senate substituted House Bill 1838 for Senate Bill 1838, adopted Amendment 1, and passed House Bill 1838 as amended.
Chairman Zapicki, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, there are two changes to this bill. The first one has to do with what districts will be appointed by the Speaker, the Lieutenant Governor, and the Governor. The Speaker of the Senate will appoint the 3rd, the 4th, and the 7th. The Speaker of the House will appoint the 2nd, the 6th, and the 8th, and the Governor will appoint the 1st, the 5th, and the 9th. And then the other change the Senate has in this amendment is that the House will confirm the members appointed by the Speaker. The Senate will appoint them or confirm the members that were appointed by the Lieutenant Governor. And then the joint resolution of the House and Senate will appoint those members appointed by the Governor. That's the only changes, members. I move to concur the Senate amendment.
Chairman Zapicki moves to concur in Senate Amendment Number 1, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Amendment Number 1, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 70, 15 nays.
Senate Amendment Number 1 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare concurred in without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Next message, Mr. Clerk.
Senate Bill 2448 by Chairman Farmer and others relative to tort liability and reform. Mr. Speaker, on March 17, 2022, the Senate non-concurred in House Amendments 1 and 2.
Chairman Farmer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, what this did was it extended the COVID liability for businesses until December of 22, and then for hospitals, December of 23. So with that, I refuse to recede from our action in adopting amendment numbers 1 and 2.
Without objection, we refuse to recede. Next message, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that completes the message calendar.
Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Unfinished business.
Unfinished business. Representative Crawford, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the rules be suspended for immediate introduction and consideration of House Joint Resolution 1011.
Mr. Clerk, please read the caption.
House Joint Resolution 1011 by Chairman Crawford and others, a resolution to honor and commend the members and coaches of the Dobbins-Bennett High School boys basketball team upon winning the TSSAA Division I Class 4A state championship.
You've heard the caption. Are there any objections? Without objection, the rules are suspended. Representative Crawford.
I move adoption of House Joint Resolution number 1011.
Representative Crawford moves adoption of House Joint Resolution 1011. Properly second. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Joint Resolution 1011 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. I declare it adopted. Without objection, the motion reconsidered is tabled. Representative Faison, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the rules be suspended for immediate introduction and consideration of House Resolution 173.
Mr. Clerk, please read the caption.
House Resolution 173 by Chairman Faison and others, a resolution to recognize the House Chamber as the site of the final vote cast in the ratification of the 19th Amendment of the United States Constitution.
You've heard the caption. Are there any objections? Without objection, the rules are suspended. Chairman Faison.
Move adoption of House Resolution number 173.
Chairman Faison moves adoption of House Resolution 173. Proper second. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Resolution 173 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. I declare it adopted without objection. Motion reconsidered is tabled. Chairman Faison, you're recognized. Oh, Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the rules be suspended for immediate introduction and consideration of H.R. 172.
Mr. Clerk, please read the caption.
House Resolution 172 by Leader Lamberth and others, a resolution to commemorate Tennessee as the volunteer state.
You've heard the caption. Are there any objections? Without objection, the rules are suspended. Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I've conferred with the minority leader. Both of us have on both of these issues, and I move adoption of H.R. number 172.
Chairman Leader Lamberth move the adoption of House Resolution 172. Probably second. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Resolution 172 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. I declare adopted without objection. Motion reconsidered is tabled. Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is my weekly series of motions to get bills into calendar that had missed the deadline. I've conferred with the minority leader. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I move that House Bills 591, 2,343, 2,345, 2,295, 1,744, 2,092, 2,673, 1,891, 2,300, 2,651, 982, and 1,648 be heard in the K through 12 subcommittee next week.
You've heard the motion. Any objection? Without objection, so ordered. Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that House Bills 751 and 1,723 be heard in the Education Instruction Committee next week.
You've heard the motion. Any objections? Without objection, so ordered. Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that House Bill 2,157 and 2,178 be heard in the Finance, Ways and Means Subcommittee next week.
You've heard the motion. Any objection? Without objection, so ordered. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, we have some messages from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I'm directed to transmit to the House Senate Bill 2616, the Senate non-concurred, and House Amendment 1.
Monday's message calendar. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I'm directed to return to the House Bill 2670, substituted for the Senate bill on the same subject, amended and passed by the Senate.
Monday's message calendar. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Announcements.
Announcements. Representative Halford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to make the announcement that the Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee is closed to the call of the chair.
Representative Doggett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members that have bills on notice for our final calendar of Criminal Justice Subcommittee, we will be meeting an additional day next week, Tuesday morning, the 29th at 9 a.m., House Hearing Room 2. We will meet, and then on Wednesday morning, we will meet 9 a.m., March 30th, House Hearing Room 2. Please make your plans to attend. Thank you very much.
Representative Spicky.
Thank you, Mr. Speakers. Members, we have a treat coming Monday night. For some of you, you haven't been part of this. The Mule Day Queen will be coming to the General Assembly. Kayla Mae Gibson and her court will be here Monday night, so we'll be able to give them a big welcome, and they're going to tell you about Mule Day coming up in about 2 weeks. Mr. Speaker, we hope to see you there.
Very good. Representative Bracken.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Tuesday, the Commerce Committee meeting has been changed from 10:30 to 9 a.m. Tuesday morning.
Representative Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Civil Justice Subcommittee has completed its business for the year and is closed, subject to the call of the chair.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Seersucker Caucus is open, subject to the call of the Seersucker Caucus, and we will meet at the podium for a picture after session. Thank you.
Representative Kumar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the good work of the staff and members, the House Insurance Committee is now closed pending to the call of the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Keisling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Heads up, members of the State Gov Committee, instead of 1:30 next Tuesday, we're going to be meeting at 1. That is 1 on Tuesday. Thank you.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Finance Appropriations Subcommittee will be meeting on Monday at an earlier time at 2 o'clock on Monday, March 28th in House Hearing Room 1. Please note that the members are not required to present their appropriation amendment requests. However, that will be taken into consideration while considering your amendments. These hearings are for informational purposes only. During these hearings, we will take up the members' appropriations as they enter the room in the order in which they enter the room to make presentations. For the members' information, there are more than 202 budget appropriations totaling more than a couple $100 million among friends. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker Pro Tem Marsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to make an announcement that the Lincoln County Hamburger Day on the Hill is next Wednesday, March the 30th. So you all please come.
Representative Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For all those who still have bills coming through local full, due to allowing some of the other committees more time, we will be meeting at 11 o'clock on Tuesday in House Hearing Room 1. 11 o'clock, House Hearing Room 1. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the way of a comment, I'd like for this body to know, first of all, that I've had the privilege of serving on Natural Resources, the Ag Committee, for about 20 years, but I've never served with a better chairman than Chairman Halford, who is about to retire at the end of this session. And I just wanted to say to the members that he served with character, integrity. He's been one of the best chairmans I ever served with. We've only had one disagreement, and that was the color that our tractors should be. I don't understand why he still like yellow tractors, but he's been one of the best chairmans I've ever served with, and I just want to thank you for your service. God bless you.
Representative Hardaway, or you want to make an announcement?
Yes, Speaker Sexton, it's not one I want to make, but I feel compelled to make. Madeline Albright, Madeline Jana Corbell Albright, former Secretary of State, the first female Secretary of State, died yesterday. And as most of you know, she was not only the first female Secretary of State, but she was also a UN ambassador. And I would ask that, especially during these times, when the former Soviet bloc is looking to regather itself, and we know that she came from the war-torn Czechoslovakia when she came to America, and her efforts to fight for the expansion and stability of NATO is part of her legacy. So I would ask that you join her family and a grateful nation with a moment of silence in acknowledging the passing of Madeline Albright. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further announcements? Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Roll call.
Roll call. Two more. Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Mr. Speaker, 89 members present.
Next order, Mr. Clerk.
That completes the regular order, Mr. Speaker.
Leader Gant, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the House stand in recess until 5 p.m. on Monday, March 28, 2022.
Without objection, the House stands recessed till 5 p.m. on Monday, March 28, 2022.